In terms of movies, DC has always been in the MCU's shadow after a number of failed big screen projects. It's not that they did terrible at the box office, but they never really managed to become a cohesive universe that people would repeatedly show up to theaters for, the way they had people tuning in for the Arrowverse several times a week. Regardless of how bad the writing on the CW was, the CEO of Warner Brothers said DC, in addition to Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, has been very underutilized by the company, and they apparently want to create some plan around DC for shareholder value. I know they already have The Batman and The Penguin, which came out and were critically acclaimed, and The Batman 2 upcoming, none of which I'm watching because you literally couldn't pay me to watch anything under the category of gritty crime drama. But it's smart to cash in on what's easily one of the most popular and critically acclaimed genres of your target demographic. And something we'll be talking about later is how filmmakers like Matt Reeves, who grew up with these stories, are probably thrilled to have the chance to be making their own versions. But despite this Batman stuff, I think DC finally got me. Maybe a little bit. Now, I've never really cared about DC in my entire life, having only watched the first Shazam movie, a random episode of My Adventures with Superman, and a few seasons of The Flash and associated Arrowverse episodes, which was honestly shocking that it lasted so long, considering how quickly The Flash declined in quality. But I'm actually interested in this new DC reboot with Superman. As soon as I saw Rachel Brosnahan and Nicholas Hoult were cast as Lois Lane and Lex Luthor, I immediately decided I'd be in theaters for this film. James Gunn, who's responsible for this reboot, definitely seems to know what he's doing in terms of marketing this film. He teased the casting bit by bit, starting with Clark Kent and Lois Lane, announcing finalists for the role, causing speculation as to who would be playing these parts as well as Lex Luthor. Like, y'all really got an ex-MCU fan interested in DC because of casting alone, even though I left Marveldom because they just started doing too much. The CEO of Disney actually agrees, saying Marvel Studios' increase in output movie and introduction of TV shows has diluted audiences' focus and attention. The studio canceled Eternals 2 because they want to focus on more guaranteed hits than taking risks. But dude, Iron Man was a risk once. Did y'all know it would be successful enough to spearhead an entire universe? Not just franchise, but a literal universe. The reason everything else is getting turned into universes. I honestly don't remember if I liked that movie or not because it's been such a long time since I actually watched it, but I do remember that it managed to distinguish itself from previous superhero films like X-Men or the million versions of Batman and Superman. The failure of Eternals wasn't because y'all took a risk with unknown characters, it's because cramming a ton of new superhero characters into one movie out of nowhere and dropping it during the pandemic just isn't a recipe for success. Bob Iger said a while back that he wanted to decrease Marvel's output to only 2 to 3 films per year and only 2 shows a year. But they're also making a Vision show, more X-Men, Young Avengers, they just did Agatha All Along, and they've got some animated stuff like Marvel Zombies, plus the upcoming Captain America film and another Fantastic Four reboot and Secret Wars and Doomsday, so good luck to them. Meanwhile, James Gunn seems to be making his Superman film not for the sake of a cash grab reboot, but because he genuinely likes Superman, and he was particularly inspired by a panel in the comics about Superman saving a suicidal kid. He thinks people have gotten really lazy with their superhero stories, saying, "I'm watching third acts of superhero films where I really just don't feel like there's a rhyme or reason to what's happening. I don't care about the characters." If that's his train of thought, then I'm definitely tuned in to see what he can do with Superman, especially now with my recent realization that despite Amazon's attempted subversion of the superhero genre with The Boys, I honestly kind of hate that show because I just don't care about the characters. It's just edgy for edgy's sake, and that doesn't work if all your characters only exist to serve the plot rather than feeling like real people. So even though the Superman film is based on a very overdone recycled IP, if it's able to tell a good story with great characters, that's an automatic leg up on a TV show based on an original comic, and even then, the original Boys comic is derivative of superhero stuff to begin with. Not a reboot, but still capitalizing off a popular existing trend with automatic audience appeal, with Homelander essentially representing twisted childhood Superman and Captain America. But at any rate, please let this be the last time y'all reboot Superman, Batman, or any of the associated characters. And even as I say that, I'm seeing there's an animated series called Batman Caped Crusader, and no doubt that newer generations will get hit with brand new DC reboots every single decade. Meanwhile, Sony is pouring all their eggs into the spiderweb with the successful animated Spider-Verse series and the spectacular flop that was Madam Web. But at least they're both something different, with Spider-Verse focusing on the character of Miles Morales, who had existed in the comics but just hadn't gotten any screen time, and all the new characters from Spider-Verse 2 and Madam Web, which I didn't see these movies, but at least it's not Peter Parker. But I just don't know how much more Spider-Man content you could possibly come up with that'll still feel fresh, right? I mean, look at MCU creating the third live-action version of Peter Parker. They thought they were so clever for bringing all 3 versions together in No Way Home, but all they did was prove that both series had better written Spider-Men and villains, and more interesting and fresh stories overall. Though that last one isn't saying much given how bland the MCU Spider-Man stories are. What made the other Spider-Man series work is that they still felt grounded, which is the whole reason Spider-Man was created as a comic book character, as a response to DC's main heroes whose real identities weren't entirely relatable, Batman being extremely rich and Superman being an alien from another planet. Spider-Man was just a regular kid in a regular world with elevated science. The Sam Raimi trilogy felt more in line with that. The Amazing Spider-Man movies I can't really remember much about, but I do remember thinking that the writing of the Spider-Man characters' dialogue, not Peter Parker's, felt the most Spidey-like. And on the whole, they still felt like Spider-Man movies. Even the animated show Ultimate Spider-Man, which was associated with other Avengers-related content that Disney was making, still managed to lean fully into the comedy and sci-fi of it all and stay grounded in its own Spidey world and still succeeded. The MCU Spider-Man movies feel like MCU movies more than Spider-Man movies, and they just feel like Disney showing off how high-tech they are without giving the same amount of care to their storytelling. This is the sort of issue issue that led to superhero fatigue. Christopher Miller and Phil Lord, who make the Spider-Verse movies, respectively think that superhero fatigue is more like a movie I've seen a dozen times before fatigue, and that audiences can't be sustained on Easter eggs and reveals. No doubt there are creators in Hollywood who feel this way about a lot of timeless IP, like Shakespeare for example. There are countless different versions of Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, etc. getting remade all the time, but it's not really to get audiences in the door. These adaptations are more about the fact that these plays and characters have become staples in literature, so different artists, writers, directors, actors, they're all interested in putting on their own version of it. It's why Matt Reeves is making a Batman universe that fans see as different from all the other Batman stuff, and it's why I'll probably be tuning in for the James Gunn Superman, because I can feel this project comes from him having a genuine connection with the source material and having a very specific story he wants to tell.